This is Codex Machina, a podcast about reading, publishing, and all things books. We are your hosts, Laura,
Natalia, and Bethany.
For today's installment of Making Book History, we're going to be talking about an artist and activist called Aileen Loy, who works in the southern part of the United States. What we're interested in, she's done a lot of really great activism around voting registration and things like that. But what she does is put banned books into installments around different cities in, I think, 5 states now. She works with a defunct newspaper and has been given permission to stock banned books in all of their old newspaper boxes where people used to be able to buy the daily paper. She tricks them out with the Little Free Contentious Library logo and fills them up with books that aren't available in school libraries anymore, and they're just free to the public. It's a very, very cool thing that she's doing. Another project that I noticed she's working on right now is that she's purchased an old school bookmobile named Gertie, apparently, and is currently fundraising to get it renovated and roadworthy again so she can start taking a bookmobile around the southern United States. I completely understand the focus on the southern area of the United States. I know that one of the things that we've talked about on this podcast is the fact that a lot of the book banning happens in Texas and Florida, especially hard, more than other states. So it's great that there is someone who is this passionate, I think, in that area. So that's Aileen. What do you guys think?
Well, I think using the newspaper boxes this way is a brilliant idea because they're easy to transport. They're easy to set up. Well, easy. I mean, they're not huge, but they're probably heavy. I don't know how heavy they are. But I think it's a great way to bring attention and have little newspaper boxes set up with banned books that people can read. I think she also does events around the banned books where people can come and check out some banned books and talk about banned books and sign up to vote and do other things. I think most places volunteer their space for her to put up these boxes, and I'm actually really hoping that we can get her as a guest on a podcast so she can talk about the work at some time.
Hopefully. Just for those of us who have not grown up in the United States, a newspaper box is it covered? Do I get it right? That it has like a little door so that it doesn't get wet?
It's a little metal vending machine almost. It has a glass door front. You have to put like your quarter in or whatever, and that will unlock the door so you can open up and take a newspaper out. I'm pretty sure that Aileen's boxes you don't have to pay to open, but you guys remember during the pandemic, these little free libraries started popping up all over. It was something that people were doing when bookstores and libraries had to be closed. And I know that one of the problems that was going on was people didn't really know how to make these waterproof. And I think the newspaper boxes are really brilliant because that's exactly what they are. They were built to hold newspapers. So they are necessarily good at holding books also.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, if I get it right from Aileen's information on her website, that's we're going to link in the show notes for this episode, she also got inspired to get Gertie going again by her childhood experiences where she had an opportunity to, engage with the same type of book distribution. I don't think that's what you necessarily call it when you're a child or a teenager. But I find this a really nice sort of nostalgic element that could also offer, in this case, a lot of like citizen action in case of this like massive, I guess we can call them massive book bans.
Well, mobile libraries were kind of really important during my childhood, her childhood too. We grew up in the same place because they were a way of, there weren't as many libraries or as many library branches at one point. So you had these mobile libraries going around, and kids could go in and pick a book and get them like any other library. And I think today they're probably really important for rural areas, anything where it's hard to have funding, buildings, access to libraries. I think it's a great thing, and I think there's still a need for things like
What you were
this.
saying earlier about the newspaper boxes, one of the things that we don't always consider is that in order to get access to books, you need access to transportation. You were saying, oh, they're probably really easy to transport and set up. And I thought, well, sure, if you have a car.
Yeah.
And I think about the people who would maybe really love to go to the library, but live too far away and can't afford a vehicle for some reason. I was lucky enough to grow up with a library in walking distance to me in a small enough community that it was safe for a kid of my age to walk to the library by myself when I wanted to. But I know that that's not necessarily the case in a lot of places. I have no experience with a bookmobile. We didn't need one in my town, but I think it's a really cool idea. And I was wondering if either of you know, are these funded by public funding, by library funding, or are these private citizens who are volunteering their time to set up these mobile books?
Back when I was a kid, I'm not sure. I mean, I always assumed like there was always a librarian at the mobile library. So maybe it was funded by the same funds that would go to the library. I actually don't know. It would be an interesting bit of history to look into, especially, if we talk about libraries and access and these kinds of things. Like you said, having a car and even walking places in the United States isn't always the easiest thing. Even if you did have a library within walking distance, would it be feasible to
Can you get there safely? Are there sidewalks with street lights?
Exactly. So, I mean, it's not just about that. So it would be interesting to do a little bit of a deep dive into how these kind of mobile means of getting books to people.
I think this was also something that came up again during the pandemic, where libraries or bookstores were trying to do deliveries to people, right? Like, so kind of a similar concept almost, but very much supposed to be a temporary solution to something. Whereas what Aileen is doing with this mobile library definitely seems to be more of a fixture that she wants to create in her community, which I think is just really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So let's hope we could have her in our podcast one of these days. And dear listener, stay tuned. So it was July 3rd, 2025. Laura, Bethany, and I found ourselves in a packed room in a cafe kind of place in Münster. And so what was happening in that room is an exciting presentation that apparently was incredibly interesting for a lot of other people, not just us. And this is how we attended a presentation about the book The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas as part of a series of lectures done by Banned Books Network here in Münster. And today we are happy to welcome Dr. Jennifer Gouck, who did the said presentation, and she agreed to talk to us today a little bit more. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello, great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
A little bit about Dr. Gouck. She is a woman in research fellow at the University of Münster, Germany. Her research focuses on representations of girlhood in contemporary American young adult literature and culture, and she is also interested in the rise of book banning in the United States. Jennifer's current project explores the abortion road trip in contemporary American young adult fiction, looking at novels like Deb Coletti's Plan A, Sharon Biggs Walters' Girls on the Verge, and Jenny Hendricks and Ted Kaplan's Unpregnant. Along with her colleagues, Professor Dr. Sylvia Schultermandel, Professor Dr. Corinna Norak-Ruhl, and Dr. Sarah Pike, Jennifer co-founded the Banned Books Network Münster in January of this year. And welcome. We're excited to have this heated discussion about a very, very important topics in the United States right now. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
Speaking of the heat of this topic, really, I was wondering if you have started this research on, for example, abortion road trip before the not so recent anymore, I guess, political changes in the landscape of the United States.
Actually, I only started this research as part of my Women Research Fellowship. So I've only really started looking at it properly in depth in the last kind of 6, 7 months or so. Before that, my research was focused on a very different kind of girlhood. So, like an idealized girlhood in the manic pixie dream girl trope, which kind of started off in film. If you think Zooey Deschanel and everything she's ever done is kind of very manic pixie dream girl. She's quirky, she's not like other girls, and she exists solely to kind of help the male protagonist find himself and find how to live better and everything else. And then she disappears. So that was what my research beforehand had been looking at. And now I've gone from looking at idealized girlhood to looking at a form of girlhood that is often maligned or very much not idealized at all, which is teen pregnancy and abortion. But yeah, it was only really then when I was kind of thinking about my next project and I looked at everything that was going on in the United States post Roe v. Wade being overturned and things like that, and the increased attack on reproductive rights, that I thought, I wonder what's going on in young adult literature about this topic. And I came across, I think it was Jenny Hendricks and Ted Kaplan's book I came across first. And then I thought, I wonder, are there more examples of these? And then I found a couple of other books. And then, yeah, I was initially thinking of doing a broader project looking at teen pregnancy, motherhood and abortion, and looking at it across genres and looking at different approaches to it and stuff. But just for this shorter fellowship, I'm just focusing on the abortion road trip for now.
So by road trip, you probably need to explain just a little bit. I'm assuming you're talking about young women that have to go outside of their state to find abortions and legal abortions anyway. And so maybe explain a little bit about that.
Yes, so by the abortion road trip, I mean exactly what you just said, Laura. So girls that are living in states like Texas, where abortion is illegal and they need to travel hundreds, thousands of miles, cross multiple state lines in order to be able to access abortion care. So the books that I look at focus on that, and they look at it kind of it's usually a road trip either with friends or in one case, one of the books, it is with a boyfriend. And so these books look then at how they have their journey as they have to go and try and access that care.
I'm making a bit of an assumption here, but I'm kind of assuming that part of the reason these books kind of came across your radar is because of your work on banned books. Like, I can only assume these books are heavily banned.
Yeah. So actually, I hadn't initially come across them because they were banned, but now that I've looked into them and I've been looking more into these books, I've been like, oh, of course, these are banned. So Plan A by Deb Coletti and Girls on the Verge by Sharon Biggs Waller have both been subject to book challenges. So in some cases, those challenges were successful and they have been banned, and in other cases, the books were retained. Another book, which I'm looking at hopefully when I develop this project further, that was published in 2024, is about two Muslim girls set kind of in a near future where not just abortion has been banned, but also things like contraceptives and all other aspects of reproductive care. And they're kind of campaigning they have a secret sort of underground campaign to try and fight for these rights. It was actually being challenged and banned even before it was published. So it's really, really interesting that these things are being, before they're even out, they're already receiving challenges and bans.
Does this make a good segue to kind of ask about what's the difference between a challenge and a ban and why it's important?
Yes, sure. So challenge is when somebody brings a complaint against a book, basically. So previously, so kind of pre-2020, I would say, this was often a single parent who was bringing a complaint about a book that they objected to the content in some way, or they didn't want their child to read it. When a book is challenged, then that usually triggers some sort of formal process within usually the school or the local library or wherever the challenge has been levied. And then a special board will consider the book. Sometimes there'll be a school board meeting, and then they'll decide if the book should be retained or not. If the book is retained, then everything carries on as it was before and nothing else happens. Or if they decide that we don't want this book in our school, then it becomes banned. And that's the difference between a challenge and a ban. So a challenge does not always lead to a ban, but it often does. And as I say, there's supposed to be these kind of procedures in place. But I think it was at PEN America, which is one of the anti-censorship organizations, found that 98% or a high percentage anyway of cases in recent years had deviated from those best practices. So we're not always seeing the proper mechanisms being carried out as they should.
It actually makes me think about how long the process takes and whether the book is available to students during the time that the challenge is being processed and considered. Do you know how long this process normally takes and how long access might be removed during a challenge?
I think it depends. It depends on the district, the school district. So yeah, the kind of cluster of schools within that area. And it depends how quickly they want to move things. I think it can take months. I don't know if it takes much longer. I haven't heard anything taking longer than a year, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't. It's just that I haven't heard about it. Sometimes the books are left on the shelves in the meantime, but a lot of the times they're removed from the shelves, sort of pending investigation. And then, yeah, sometimes as well, what happens is even if the book is allowed to be kept in the library, it'll be moved. So, for example, if it was a children's book or YA book, it might no longer be available freely on those shelves. So it might be moved to the adult section, or it might be moved behind the desk. So patron would have to come and ask specifically for that book. Or sometimes, particularly in school libraries, children and young people can't read the book without a letter from their parents or guardian giving them permission. So sometimes, even though you can look at the statistics and say, oh, great, this book wasn't banned, actually, when you dive into it a bit deeper, access to it was still restricted in some way.
Just to go back to the preemptiveness of what you just mentioned, right? So stores, for example, or libraries would take it out just pending investigation. And that sounds to me like a little bit of this self-censorship in a way, right? Just in order to avoid any complication or sudden complication in the future, they just take it down to not stir, the pot. And that seems to be a rather unsettling sort of tendency, because that's how book challenging succeeds without even necessarily first leading to proper banning, right? Because libraries take the initiative in this case to, remove it.
Yeah, exactly. And you were absolutely right. It's also called soft censorship too, where it's this idea of kind of, pre-censorship or self-censorship, in that librarians, will maybe look at a list of books that are coming out, and even if a book they think would be really great for their collection, or they can imagine a couple of their patrons that would really enjoy it, they're not ordering those books exactly for the reasons you said, because they're kind of trying to cut it off, head it off at the pass before it gets to the stage of potentially being challenged. Because it's putting librarians at risk. Some librarians are losing their jobs over this. It's a lot of stress for them too, to be going through these kind of these procedures. And so they're heading it off at the pass. And especially too, if you have a limited budget, because libraries are already struggling with their budget, they maybe look at it and think, oh, do I really want to order this book, even though it's a really important book and I can see it's really helping so many people in my community? Or should I spend that money on something safe, inverted commas, that I'm pretty sure isn't going to be challenged? So it's so difficult for librarians and teachers on the ground right now while they're trying to make those decisions.
I was curious, how likely is it, or how are the children in these schools aware of the banning and the challenges? Do they really understand what's happening? Is that talked about very much? How many kids actually talk about, well, I wanted to read this book, but it was banned? Is there much information about that out there?
That is a really good question, actually. I haven't looked into it a tremendous amount, so I can't speak to it too much. But what I can say is there was a documentary came out in, I think it was 2023, called Band Together, and BANNED, Band Together. And it looked at a group of teens who were fighting to get books reinstated in their library. I've also seen sort of smaller news segments and things like that, either on the BBC or CBS, those kind of places, following a small group of students in a particular school and that are trying to get books reinstated. But beyond that, I'm honestly not sure. The other thing that I have noticed recently is there was some legislation brought in. Again, I think it was in Texas, where students aren't even allowed, if a book has been banned, they aren't allowed to bring their own personal copies in. So if they owned the book at home, they weren't allowed to have it on their person, otherwise they could get in trouble. And I know that there was some sort of resistance to that then from students because they were, bringing the books in specifically as an act of resistance to try and kind of share it among each other and things like that. But yeah, I'd love to know more about that. Actually, I should look into that because it would be interesting to see how the young people themselves are responding.
Yeah, I had my own incident with that when I was in 6th grade with Judy Blume's Forever. Of course, we're talking the 80s here, early 80s, and my mother read the book first to make sure it was okay and that she could talk to me about any of the issues. And of course, I took it to school, and I was in a gifted and talented program at the time and was a top student. And so, I think I'm allowed to have this book. It's not a problem. But in the lunchroom, the teacher came and took it away from me, my teacher, whom I loved and adored. And I was so shocked that this would happen. And, she gave me the book back at the end of the day, but the explanation was there's younger kids here in the classroom that maybe it wouldn't be appropriate for them. I don't know if the book itself was banned specifically or they just didn't want it at the school. But I remember she gave me the book back and I went to my mother's car waiting for me, just a string of expletives coming out of my mouth, my mother not knowing what happened. I was just so disappointed and shocked that, something like this would happen to me. So it was a fun story about that. But I feel like these stories aren't as fun anymore.
No, and it's interesting that you mentioned about this idea of like what's appropriate, because I think that's what is weaponized a lot of the time by book banners, that we're thinking of the children and we have to protect their innocence. And that is all rooted in these like centuries old ideas that children are pure and innocent and should be protected in this way. And particularly in America, it's related to ideas of like nationhood and innocence. And yeah, and it's interesting too that this is something that book banners think, they clearly, book banners acknowledge the power of literature because clearly they think, oh, the books are going to do these things to our children, but yet they don't. Yeah, there's not that critical thinking going on there. But it's all about this idea of like what's appropriate. And I think it does a great disservice to children and young people because kids and young people, they're smart and they are curious and they want to know about these things and they want to see themselves represented in a book. They want to learn about other people's experiences. Yeah, to say that they can't handle it or that it's inappropriate, I think sort of, it does a great disservice to them sometimes.
And I think, Judy Blume's Forever, it's a really good book for young people, especially as they're getting into teenagehood, to kind of understand about sexual relationships and how these happen and what happens. And I think the absence of this information leads to some of the problems that occur in teen pregnancy and rape and being abused or misused because you don't see these relationships play out normally in books about young people or anything. So, I think it can be dangerous to not have access to such stories.
Yeah, exactly. Because it gives children and young people a safe space to explore these things. And yeah, it's so important, because that's one thing as well I've noticed in my abortion road trip research, is that, you know, because the abortion restrictions, while obviously they are impacting women of all ages, they are disproportionately affecting young people. And there's a great percentage of young people that are living in states with these kind of reproductive health care restrictions. But this is kind of being paralleled by educational gag orders that are saying that teachers can't discuss anything to do with sex, gender, sexuality in the classroom. And the removal of not necessarily just fiction, but also non-fiction books that are sex education, about gender, about, you know, contraception, and all these sort of things are also being removed. So it's all kind of happening in tandem.
One thing I wanted to say that I just kind of found striking about Laura's story from sixth grade was the fact that this book was confiscated by a teacher, despite the fact that she had clear parental permission to be reading it. And I find that is one of the most frustrating and weird things about the current kind of situation with book banning, is I've noticed that it's very much there's this rhetoric about parental rights and parents saying, I have the right to be the one to decide what my children are learning, and I don't want those books in the school library because I don't want my kids to read those books. And it's really just putting aside this whole thing of like, okay, but what about the parents who say it's okay? What are their rights in all of this? And I know that some of your research has really gone into like these parental groups, and I wondered if you would say a little about that.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, as I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier, previously, so kind of particularly pre-2020, book challenges were often brought by individual parents who, as I kind of said, would say, I don't want my kid to read that. Post 2020, then we've seen a rise of groups like Moms for Liberty, who ironically are not about liberty. But they started off actually protesting COVID-19 measures, so vaccinations, mask mandates, things like that. And then now that, you know, that sort of discussion has died down, they've moved into looking at book bans, looking at discussions of things like critical race theory, discussions of race, gender, sexuality, all that sort of thing. And there are other organizations that are similar, like No Left Turn in Education, Parents' Rights in Education, and a couple of the sort of anti-censorship organizations that compile all this different data and track what's going on. So the American Library Association and PEN America have found that now we are seeing the majority of these challenges are coming from these groups. So it's an organized movement now, rather than a couple of parents saying, hey, I don't want my kid to read that. And so that means that we're seeing a shift also from, I don't want my child to read that, to no child should read that. And it's this move then from something that is potentially private, like in a private home sphere where I don't want my kids to read that, to public and kind of making blanket decisions for the whole community based on your own personal beliefs and what you do or do not want your child to read. So, and it's really, really interesting. Moms for Liberty in particular, they're one of the bigger ones. They are giving parents kind of toolkits for doing book challenges and bans. So if you go on their website, they have it organized as, here's how to write to the school board, here's how to write your book banning complaints, here's how to complain about LGBT content, here's how to do this, here's how to do that. And it walks them through the steps, and it gives them the templates and the language they need to, approach the school board. And here's what to do if they don't, they don't take you seriously. Here's what to do if you challenge the book but they keep it. And yeah, it means then that this is becoming more and more of it's an organized movement and a concerted effort to ban books. And again, all in the name of protecting the children. They say that, we're fighting for the liberty of parents. We're fighting to protect our children and their innocence. But actually, they're not really doing any of those things.
Do we know who's behind groups like Moms for Liberty? I just saw a headline that they had in 2022 $2.1 million in revenue. And I'm just trying to figure out like where their money is coming from, where, who's supporting this, because it seems like it might be coming from a group like Heritage Foundation or something that's getting this going.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics on their financials, and I don't want to make any claims in case I get sued. But I will say that the founders were all connected to Republican politicians. But ironically, then there were three co-founders whose names are escaping me right now, but they were all kind of Republican related to Republicanism. But ironically, then one of them stepped down because there was something to do with like an affair, or like a dodgy sort of sexual situation that went on, which is ordinarily none of anybody's business. But I did think there was an irony to that, and that they're promoting family values and protecting the children, and yet. But I think too, they see Moms for Liberty seem to be partnering with a lot of sort of Christian fundamentalism, or fundamentalist, I should say, organizations. So they have a new-ish initiative called Moms for Libraries. And this is about, essentially, in their minds, I think, replacing these awful books that they're trying to get banned with books that promote good sort of family American Christian traditional values. And then you have things like freedom books, where, again, it's rooted in Christian fundamentalism. It's anti-LGBT, it's anti-abortion. There's one that's like, I think it's called Elephants Don't Fly, or Elephants Can't Fly, but that's supposed to be anti-trans. There's one about more spots than stripes, and that's supposed to be about, and this is a quote from their website, the dangers of critical race theory. Yeah, there's another one that is about is anti-abortion. So they seem to be collaborating with these as well. And then there's also some sort of business deal set up there, because there's a discount code for each of these. So if you go and order from these publishers or these websites, I remember when I was sort of exploring the website, it'll say, oh, enter, Moms for Libraries 10 for 10% off, and this sort of thing. So there's some sort of business thing that on there too. But I hadn't heard that figure about the revenue. That's absolutely wild.
I'm a bit surprised to hear this as well, because if we look at their website right now, so it's something they claim. Moms for Liberty is a nonprofit organization. If you scroll a little bit higher, you can see the Liberty shop with all the merch you can buy. So I would assume still, like, they do have some income. I don't know if they could have reached that number that we've had before, just by selling T-shirts, with quotes from John Adams. I don't know.
I don't know. I can really easily see them just getting that amount of money purely through donations from the community. Like, there's a lot of people in this organization. This could just be money that they're putting into it themselves. It's not that huge of a number, I don't think, financially speaking. And it honestly, kind of where my mind is going with it all is just like, wow, that's a lot of people who support this. And you say they have these like toolkits and all of these things and these connections, and I think it's such a shame that all of these women have found this kind of empowerment in being organizers in a community, in having this kind of political drive to make changes, and they find all of this power through taking things away from other people. And I'm just like, man, you really, really could channel this elsewhere so easily. Like, why can't we make this an organization that is about giving children contraceptives or whatever they need, and it has to be instead about taking education away from them instead of providing it. It's just really astonishing to me that that's somebody's priority.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I'm trying to find the figures here about their Moms for Liberty's membership, because it went up. So it was co-founded in 2021 as I said, to campaign against COVID-19 measures like masks and vaccines. They had 285 chapters, so 285 kind of groups, in 45 states by July 2023, and 32 of those were just in Florida. Florida is one of the sort of book banning hotspots alongside Texas. And by 2024, they had 130,000 members. But I think it all kind of stems back to what's going on in politics right now in terms of that kind of like Trump politics and this traditional values. And I don't know if you noticed, this is perhaps a bit of a tangent, but like Jojo Siwa and her recent, so she was in Dance Moms as a kid in recent years, or styled herself as a kind of alt figure. I think she came out as bisexual, or she's identified as part of the LGBTQ plus community anyway. It was a very alternative figure. And then just recently, she did like a cover of Betty Davis Eyes and has really styled herself as this like trad wife sort of aesthetic. There was a whole scandal because she seemed to get when she was on Big Brother, she seemed to get very close to one of the male housemates while her girlfriend was on the outside. And then now they've broken up and she's with the guy and this whole thing. But I bring this up to say that this like trad wife aesthetic, these rise in like traditional values, inverted commas, this rise in as well rhetoric from men online, particularly conservative men, about your body, my choice. This surge again in rhetoric about women belong in the kitchen and all this sort of thing. I think this is all kind of connected to everything that's going on, and it's about power and it's about control and it's about keeping these communities locked down so that they can't resist.
Yeah, well, we've come a long way from Tipper Gore and her censorship of music, but I want to like have a little bit of a glimpse at the other side of the coin. Now, I know there are a lot of organizations like PEN America that are working kind of on the other side of this, and also kind of homegrown things. Like I have a high school friend who has a pretty good little contentious book library that she's putting libraries all over. I think she's in 5 states now with these little she renovates these newspaper boxes, old newspaper boxes, and puts banned books in them and sets them up all over kind of the South and Georgia and Texas and whatever. So can you tell us a little bit about organizations that are actively working to kind of promote books and information and the things that are coming from this?
Yeah, so in the States, as you said, I would say the biggest ones are the American Library Association and PEN America. The American Library Association founded Banned Books Week way back when. I think it was the 80s it was founded. And it's an a week where you actively focus on resisting censorship, what books are being banned. It celebrates banned books and celebrates the value of these and the value of resisting censorship. There's also, as I said, PEN America. They're one of the organizations alongside the American Library Association that track what's going on. They compile data, they release reports. They also have a newsletter, which is really interesting and also helpful for someone like me who's, the United States is such a vast country in terms of each state there's so much going on within each state, and it's so difficult to keep on top of everything that's happening within each state. So it kind of compiles, the newsletter will kind of give you the headlines, the big things that are going on. So I will offer you ways that you can resist. So for example, if you live in that state, they'll say, here's where you can look up who your local representative is and write to them or call them or whatever else. Other than that, there's another organization called the Freedom to Read and Freedom Fighters, as in FREAD, Freedom Fighters, in Texas. And they are actively made up of librarians and educators who are on the ground who are trying to resist in all the ways that they can within Texas. So by including books where they can in their classrooms and their collections, by going and giving talks to people from other states, from other libraries, whatever else. And then I suppose there's people like us here in Munster who are maybe a little bit removed but have seen what is going on and have seen how urgent it is, how important it is that we try and do something about it. Because sometimes I think, particularly in academia, it could feel like, you hear this thing about the ivory tower, we're all a little bit removed and not doing anything. And it's how nice it is for us all to talk about these things while all the little people down there, struggle. But that's something that we wanted to actually be able to understand what's going on from an academic perspective, because a lot of the research so far has documented what's going on, it's chronicled what's going on, it's pointed to trends, it's pointed to sort of impacts in the classroom. So this is how, you know, kids in this particular class felt, or this is what happened when we read this book. But we're trying to advance the conversation that next step further to go, okay, we've all identified this. We know it's awful. We know it needs to stop. We know we need to resist. So what do we do, or what happens next? And that's why we set up the network. And especially I think that's important because it's not just, we're starting to see kind of copycat the spread of book banning and censorship outside the United States. Now, that's not to say, obviously, there are other countries where book banning has existed for a long time. But what I mean is we're seeing direct copies. So, for example, in the UK, there was an article come out in the Guardian newspaper a few months ago where librarians are reporting that parents are coming in and based on what they've seen in the news or based on what they've seen happening in America, have come in and asked for a specific book to be removed. And even here in Germany, in Münster, one of the local librarians that attended our events said that there was a book a parent asked them to remove. It was about a rhinoceros eating cake. And the parent asked them to remove it because how dare you promote unhealthy eating with a fat body? Yeah. So I think it's important as well to understand what's going on over there so that we can be ready and stop it getting to the stage it is over there elsewhere in Europe. And hopefully then at some stage in the future, we'll be able to collaborate with other researchers, other activists in other countries where they're experiencing these things too. But it's just, unfortunately, as Americanists, we're like, our expertise is in America. That's the bit that we know about. So, but there are people, and actually as well, sorry, this has been a very long answer, this part. This has become my solo podcast, listeners. Publishers are actually starting to actively resist too. So, for example, Penguin, they are in a number of legal cases at the moment where they are challenging particular states, particular school districts for what is going on. So, the fact that these kind of big, and it's not just, I mean, it would be important to if it were smaller publishers, but the fact that we're seeing these big name, like the big five publishers, these big conglomerates with a lot of with huge legal teams, with a lot of money behind them, getting involved in this, I think is also hopeful because clearly, yeah, they have the tools to be able to kind of get involved in this and hopefully make a difference too. So yeah, it's not all super bleak. There are people out there that are fighting and making a difference.
Well, I think obviously for publishers, it can really hurt their bottom line to have mass book bans of books that probably sell well and are popular, and they have a vested interest in being able to sell kind of whatever they want.
And I think I remember when on Instagram, Penguin Random House started posting about this, and their message was very clearly, hey, if we don't stand up, then who will? And we have the capacity to do so. And I thought, oh, that is actually such a nice thought. But then as a researcher, you can't keep thinking like, yeah, but also all of these libraries, they're paying not only for physical copies of your books, but also for the e-copies and audiobooks that they provide. And sometimes they pay even so much more for e-books that it's insane. When you look at the back end work of libraries, you think things completely change your perspective. I've heard it from a friend of mine who was into this research, and I was like, oh my God, that's a completely different world. But back to the point, right? I think there is also, of course, an interest in financial side of book banning, or can we like
capitalism?
yeah, exactly. And maybe in this case, it's actually handy for us as users, as citizens, even though we do not reside in America, but still in general, that capitalism would motivate someone as big as Penguin Random House to take action. And I think fairly enough it would be to say that they can succeed in that case. They do have enough power. They also have their playbooks, how to deal with these situations, right? And so, yeah, we'll see how that's going to develop. But I also find it really interesting that their message was like, hey, we're doing this for the readership because we want to bring books of our authors to the readers. And I'm like, we'll see. Like,
Yeah.
As I'm sure they have profit motives, but I mean, like, if somebody shows up to the front line of a fight with a bunch of cool equipment and, you know, are there to fight with you, are you really gonna quibble about why they showed up? You're just gonna be like, oh no, thank you for coming, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's messy. It's one of those things, you gotta pick the wins where you can get them. But equally, yeah, when you start to unpack things a little bit more. And I think it's interesting too, because it is the publishing end of things, and the publishing response to this is so, I was gonna say messy, but I'm not sure the complicated maybe. Because on the one hand, there was a time where having your book banned saw a spike in sales. Top 10 banned lists or top 20 banned lists nearly became sort of TBRs for people to go out then and buy it, because it increases, it had the opposite effect of that. It increased curiosity about this, and, oh, I want to read this now specifically because it's been banned. I know John Green came out a while ago and said that's not the case anymore, and other authors are coming out and saying, look, it's not even that it's good publicity, inverted commas, anymore, because it's not having that intended effect or unintended effect anymore, where people are going out and buying the books. Yeah, so there's that part of it. Then you also have, so for example, that book that I was mentioning earlier about the two Muslim teenagers, which of course I can't remember the name of it now. I was trying to think of it while we were talking, and I can't remember it. But their sort of PR company decided to use the fact that it was banned and challenged before it came out as a marketing hook. And so they decided to lean into it and use it in that way. And then obviously on top of that, then you have what we're talking about in terms of, okay, but if our books are banned, then sales are going to go down. So we need to do something about it. So it's kind of a big messy mixture of all these different things going on, where we're leading into it, but then we're also in some ways, but also we're trying to resist it at the same time within that like publishing sphere.
I mean, for sure. Also, like, people who work in the publishing sphere love books, right? They also, regardless of the financials of the situation, there's going to be a fairly anti-censorship concept just for anybody who loves books enough to work with them for a career, right? Yeah, I was just thinking about the fact that, this Streisand effect of, everybody wants to read the banned book only works because there's one Streisand. Once there's 4,000 of them, you can't, that's too big of a TBR at that point, I guess. And maybe book banning has become kind of such a common topic that it no longer kind of excites this same sort of indignant resistance anymore, which is not necessarily a good thing.
A question: of the books that Moms for Liberty and other groups promote, do we know who the publishers of these books are, and if they are in any way imprints of some of the bigger publishers? I know the big five all seem to have their ultra conservative right wing imprint. So I'm just curious about the publishing line on those.
Let me see if I can get it up. Yes, we've got Brave Books. I think they're their own separate thing. I think I called them Freedom Books earlier by mistake. Oh, I know what it is. It's Brave Books is the publisher, but I think Freedom Island is where the books are the books are set. They seem to be their own thing. Yeah, Brave Books is a Christian publishing company that makes books for kids that reinforce biblically based foundational values. But I have to say, I don't know about, I'd love to hear more. You were saying about there are some of the big five have specifically conservative
Yeah.
publishing imprints.
Yeah, I've seen news things on a couple of them that you find out, like, Hachette has these right-wing books. I don't remember specifically, but I think it's something to look into. Kind of find out if they're straddling two lines on this or what's happening, because I guess, you want to go where the money is. So,
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and I found the name of that other book that I've mentioned about the two Muslim girls. It's Seema Yasmin is the author, and it's called Unbecoming. And that's the one that faced challenges before it was even published. But yeah, if you have a little look around, it was really interesting. The PR company for that said, developed their marketing strategy based on the fact that it was already being banned and challenged. Yeah.
We're going to link everything we mentioned here in the show notes. And I was looking for the links of the Penguin Random House statement on book banning and so on. And I was scrolling through their Instagram account. And so they also sell merchandise, hoodies that say read banned books. I was like, oh, gotta save all of that. Yeah, you can't just scroll Instagram these days. You have to think, okay, I'm gonna save that link so I could link it in my podcast or in research because someone someday in the future might need it.
Yeah, one of the sort of people that have been working on the network with this, Aline Francouz, she did her master's thesis here in Munster on the kind of commodification of book banning and censorship and all the kind of merch and things you can buy. You know, I read banned books, I'm with the band, that sort of thing. So that's a whole other thing in itself that is really fascinating. We could probably have a whole other podcast just on that.
I did find a bunch of names just now of imprints that publish conservative titles for the big five. Looks like most of them have one. There's Broadside Books is an imprint of HarperCollins, Center Street for Hachette, Threshold for Simon and Schuster, and Sentinel for Penguin. Like they all seem to have one where they're publishing, for example, like right-wing politicians in their memoirs or their manifestos. And for example, Donald Trump Jr.'s book, Vivek Ramaswamy's book, like these are getting published through these imprints.
And for example, Unbecoming, we've just mentioned, is also Simon and Schuster.
I mean, yeah, they're big enough they can play both sides, right? Easily. And on that depressing note,
how about we, like, I feel like the best way to actually exist as a reader, as a creative content researcher in this sphere, just as a person really, is to create, fill the space with other ideas, other books, other thoughts, not just oppose and describe, but literally while they are talking about these things, we're gonna be talking about others and thus create lots of traction. And so maybe on that depressing note, Jennifer, what are you reading now? Do you have any book recommendations for us?
Oh, I have to admit, I was in a little bit of a reading slump there because I had been working a lot and was doing all the boring academic things of writing funding applications and things like that, and just did not have the brain juice for a lot of reading. What I'm actually doing at the minute is, so I will be hopefully have an interview with John Green in a couple of weeks for a part of a special issue that I'm doing for the International Journal of Young Adult Literature. So I need to start rereading a couple of his books that I haven't read in a while. Some of his I'm very, very familiar with because they were part of my thesis, but things like An Abundance of Catherines I haven't read in a long time. So I need to go back and reread that. There is a book I'm just about to start actually called X Marks the Spot. It's by Gloria Chow, and it's kind of a rivals to lovers little YA romance, but it's also to do with kind of puzzles and finding I think it's a grandfather has left behind something in his will for her. Let me get the right blurb here because I'm not selling this very well, but I'm excited to start it. Yeah, so for Gemma's whole life, it's always been her and her mom against the world. As far as she knew, all her grandparents, and thus her ties to Taiwanese culture, were dead. Until one day, when a mysterious man shows up at her door with the shocking news that her grandfather has just recently passed, and the first clue to a treasure hunt that Gemma hopes will lead to her inheritance. There's just one major problem. To complete the hunt, she has to go to her grandfather's home in Taiwan. And the only way Gemma can get there is by asking her ex and biggest high school rival, Xander, for help. But after swallowing her pride, she finds herself halfway across the world, ready to unearth her life-changing prize. Soon, Gemma discovers that the treasure hunt is about much more than money. It's about finally learning about her family, her cultural roots, and maybe even finding true love. So yeah, I'm excited to start that after my slump. A post-production side note, apologies for double voicing. There were some connection problems and yeah, we had to patch it up.
Well, I think we should pivot back to what's next for the Banned Books Network Munster. What are we looking at with this project?
So we have the last two events in our conversation series for this year. So the next talk is Annie on My Mind. And then our last talk at the end of the year in December is on Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. So we're really looking forward to those. We're also scheming for some events in and around Banned Books Week. So we're hoping to have something going on there, maybe a film screening, something like that. and maybe a zine making workshop. We don't know yet. So there's some cool things going on around there. And then the conference, so we're hosting an online conference, book banning, called Thinking of the Children, and it's going to be in February. And so we're also hoping to plan some more events for next year, and just see where it takes us, really. So I think eventually we're hoping to get some funding, so that we can do more on the research side of things, and hoping that eventually this will be kind of the catalyst for other networks in other countries or other areas to pop up and establish themselves, so that they can look at what's going on in their particular context. Because unfortunately, much as we would like to, we can't do everything, and we can't look at banned books, for example, in China or Russia or other kind of contexts. So we're hoping that we'll be able to help other networks eventually pop up and be able to do the work in their own context.
Yeah, so it's really making book history in real time, catching things at its source and trying to change how things play out. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and fingers crossed that we can see some real change. And we're only just like we're still a little baby, because we only really founded ourselves in January. So I'm really excited to see what comes up and what opportunities arise that we had never even thought about. So yeah, really excited to see where things go next.
We're going to link all the information about the Banned Books Network in our show notes. So please make sure to follow, subscribe, like and subscribe. You know what to do. We foresee exciting things in the future. And on that happy note,
As always, dear listeners, the real message is read more books.
yay!